Welcome back to the next session on SQL Server Analysis Services. So in last session, we discussed about creating the hierarchies, creating user-defined hierarchies basically, and then creating parent-child hierarchies and a couple of other stuff. Now in this session, let's talk about properties. We have a lot of properties to discuss. Like if you see at the dimension level, you have a good number of properties like depends on dimension, attribute member, correlation, and error configuration, and storage mode. This is very important property, storage mode and unknown member and so on. And more than that, the properties at each attribute level is very important. So here you can define a property at attribute level. For example, if you see enable, hierarchy ordered, hierarchy optimized, and you'll have two options, not optimized and fully optimized, and you have a description which is not of a high importance property, but key columns which we already discussed, similarly name columns and so on. Here these two options, just to order the properties in ascending order or group it. If you click on group, if you see all the key column related stuff are grouped into one, column related stuff, and all the source related stuff grouped into one, and parent child related stuff grouped into one, miscellaneous grouped into one, and basic properties grouped into one. Something like that. Okay, advanced properties are grouped into one. Now my plan is I'll go through the properties that are of a high importance, and then I'll show you how to create the dimensions, date dimension. There are a couple of other options, right? While creating the date dimension and all. I mean, creating the date dimension in the data source or creating the date dimension in the server and so on. So we will be discussing about that stuff. And once we create the measure group and cubes, then we will revisit and we'll go through the remaining properties. Because you need to have the cube available to see the difference before and after, kind of, right? In the ads, if you see before, you see right normally before and after. Similarly, once we change the property, what's the output, and what's the output if I change the property to a different value. Okay, let's start with a couple of important properties which we need to go through at this point of at this level. So first, let me take any dimension. Let me go with the date dimension because I have hierarchies. There are some properties at hierarchies level also. So let me take this one. So I'm going to apply all the properties on one attribute, let's say calendar year. Okay. So let me hide the solution explorer. I open the calendar year properties, and even you can select any other dimension attribute here. If you want to set the properties at the key level, you don't need to come here and select that. You can just select the drop down and you can select whatever the attribute for which you want to change the properties. For now, let me concentrate on calendar year. So attribute hierarchy display folder, which we will be discussing later once we create the cube, and attribute hierarchy enabled and attribute hierarchy visible. These two are very important properties. People will ask you a question like, what is the difference between attribute hierarchy enabled and attribute hierarchy visible? Both are set to true by default. Now let's start with one by one. So first let's start with always the first, while during processing, the server will check for attribute hierarchy enable property first, whether it's set to true or false. You can set it to either true or false, and then based on this, then it will check for attribute hierarchy visible or not. Now let's see what is this property. Let me take a pen. Okay, so if you have an attribute and you can use it in your analysis service, right? You can drag it to drag it in your Excel sheet or from where you connect to this cube, and you can see the data in that. Now if you set this attribute hierarchy enable to false, then this will be disabled. This will not be processed. This will not processed means in the sense, you remember, right? If it is the query will be sent to the database and reads the data, it will not be processed and it will not be available to the end user for their analysis purpose. Now let me set the property to false, and when I set the property to false, you can see this has been disabled. And the second thing is, if you set the attribute hierarchy enable to false, you are not allowed to use that particular attribute in hierarchies, user-defined hierarchies. What is user-defined hierarchies? The one user create the definition for that. In this case, it is hierarchy, the one what you are seeing on the screen. This is defined by the user name Rupesh Valuru, right? So if you see, when I disabled it, immediately showing error message saying if you keep your mouse here, the source attribute, it does not have the attribute hierarchy enabled. So that is the problem. So what I need to do to fix this issue, I need to have it enabled to true. If I set it to enable to true, you can see the attribute has been enabled and the issue has been, and the error message is gone. So attribute hierarchy enable, if you set it to true, everything is good. All the properties will be fine. The attribute will work like normal attribute. But if you set it to false, this attribute will not be processed, this attribute will not be visible to the user, and this attribute cannot be used in your hierarchies, right? It cannot be used in your user-defined hierarchies. Now, let me take some attribute which is not used in the hierarchy, and let me try to set it to false, and let me process it. And don't ask me if it send the query to the SQL Server, because I never tried this. Basically, by setting the attribute hierarchy enabled to false and process it, I processed it, but I've never seen whether the query is sent to the SQL Server or not. But but theoretically, it won't process and it won't make the attribute visible to the user. Physical year, this is the physical year. Tread the data, but I don't think it will be having it will not be available to the end user, and it will not have the data in the analysis services. Okay, and the next thing is, if you set it to false, okay, let me browse that first, whether I can see that attribute or not. Physical year, can you see physical year? No, it has been hidden. It will not be available to the end user. Okay, cool, up to here. Now, what other things about attribute hierarchy enable to false? If you set it to false, you don't need to set this property. This property will not work. And we'll discuss about what is this property once we set it to, once we enable it. And also, attribute hierarchy visible, it doesn't make any sense if you disable it. If you set the enable to false, even this property does not make any sense. And even order by, this is also of no use. And there is one more property, attribute hierarchy order, set to true or false. If you set it to false here, then this doesn't make any sense, because the attribute itself is not available, and it doesn't need to be ordered, it doesn't need to be visible. I mean, this doesn't make any sense, and even fully optimized. Now, keep in mind, if you set the attribute hierarchy enable to false, it won't be processed and it won't be available to the end user, and it cannot be used in the user-defined hierarchies. Now, I would like to show something pretty quickly in Cube. Okay, so first let's discuss about attribute hierarchy visible property. Once you set it to true, then it will look for attribute hierarchy visible property. So the attribute is enabled now, and you can use it now. But what is this attribute hierarchy visible property will do? So the visible property, it will either hide or make it visible to the end user. So if you set it to false, this particular attribute is hidden now. It won't be shown to the end user. Even though it is enabled, it is hidden because I set the visibility to false. The major difference between these two is, let's take the calendar here. I enable this one and I'm setting it to false, and you can see there is no impact on the hierarchy. So the hierarchy is perfect, it is going to work perfectly, but this won't show the calendar year because I set the property to false, the visible property to false. Now let me quickly process this and let me show you whether the attribute will be shown to the end user or not, and what is the advantage of enable and visible, compare between properties enable and visible of an attribute. Now let me reconnect it, and you can see calendar year, right? It's missing because I set the visible property to false. If I go to the hierarchy, still you can see the years here. Okay, so that is the major difference. If you set it to false of hierarchy enable to hierarchy enable or hierarchy visible, then the attribute will not be shown. That's for sure. But the major difference is you can use the attribute if the enable is true and visible is false in the user defined hierarchies. And you can't use the attribute for which the property enable is set to false. Okay, so that is the major difference. And at this point of time, I would like to show something else. For that, you don't need to concentrate much. I just want to show the difference. And once you become familiar with the MDX concepts, then you can relate what we have discussed here, or you can rewind the video and see what is discussed about these two properties. I'm going to show you one MDX query pretty quickly. So for that, I need a cube. Let me click create one cube. I don't concentrate much on this. New measure should be fine. And let me take fact internet sales, and I'll go with earning sales amount. Okay, and let me add only one dimension, that is date dimension, which we are playing with. Now going back to the date dimension, I set the property of calendar year visibility to false and physical year enable to false. Okay, observe it pretty clearly. Physical year enable is set to false and calendar year visible is set to false, and hence I can use the calendar here, but if I drag and drop, it will throw an error. You can see because this is disabled. Now let me delete it. Now going back to the cube, I'm going to quickly process the cube. I just want to show what difference it makes in MDX concepts. Okay, the process is successful, and let me quickly browse it to see whether the data is coming or not. Fact sales amount, yeah, data is perfect. Now to query using MDX, I'm gonna connect to SQL Server Management. I'm gonna connect to Analysis Server in SQL Server Management Studio. Come on. Okay, let me go to Analysis Server and connect, and the database name is AdventureWorks TW, and let me click on New Query. So when I click on New Query, it will load the structure of your cube. You can see this is the structure of my cube at this point of time. Let me drag and drop here. I'm going to write one simple MDX query. As you are not familiar with this, don't try to concentrate or try to understand here. From AdventureWorks TW, if I execute it, it will give me the sales amount, and I am gonna add calendar year of it. I know calendar year visibility is set to false, correct? So what I'm gonna do here is, I know the spelling of the attribute, though it is set to false, visibility is set to false. I know the spelling of it. So on one, if I execute it, it's giving me year-wise information. So that is processed and it is still available in the analysis server. The data is available in the analysis server, and it is available even in the hierarchy defined. Now let's try the same for physical. I never tried this. I'm going to try it today for first time. So I'm going to query, instead of calendar year, I'm going to do it with physical year, and I'm not sure about the results. Let's see. And you can see the physical year is not processed and there is no data for physical year. So visible property set to false, that is just hidden. That's it. And enable property set to false, it's not processed and it is not available at all in the analysis server. So this is one major difference. In MDX also, if it is visible to false and if you know the attribute name, you can use it in your MDX query. But if you know the attribute name and if the enable property is set to false, then you cannot use it, because you can use it, but it won't return any data because it has not been processed. So this is the one of the major difference between hierarchy and attribute hierarchy enabled to false and visible set to false. Now let's go back to the dimension again and let's continue our discussion about the properties, the other properties. Let me select the disabled one. Once I disable it, then there is no much meaning with this property, right? Attribute hierarchy visible, I set it to true or false, it doesn't make any difference. And the second property which is dependent on this hierarchy enable, right? That is attribute hierarchy optimized. So when the attribute hierarchy is processed, that means when it reads the data from your SQL Server database or any relational database, in short data warehouse, to the analysis service database, it create indexes after reading the data. So if you give it as fully optimized, so it will create indexes on top of the data. If you don't want, then you can set it as non-optimized. So this property will come into picture when um, you are gonna use the attribute or not. Let's say I have a 15 attributes or 20 attributes here, and Spanish month name I'm not gonna use that frequently. Let's say 1 in 1,000 queries I'm gonna use the Spanish month names. For that I may not need uh, indexes. That will improve performance of the processing, right? It want to create indexes on top of the data that has been read. The table is pretty big one. After reading the data, creating indexes, it's going to take some time. It's even though it's a little increment in the processing performance, if you add up hundreds of attributes like this, then it's going to gain good amount of processing performance. So this property basically decides whether to create the indexes after reading the data into the attributes or not. So by default, it will be fully optimized. If you disable it at the first place, it is not going to read the data. Then what's the meaning in setting the property? This will become invalid, or it will not have any impact even if you set it to fully optimized or not optimized if the enable property is set to false. But if it is true and this is false, then this makes much difference. If you create the aggregations, I mean, if you it will create the indexes if you set it to fully optimized, or else you're not optimized, it won't create any indexes on the data. So be careful in choosing enable or disable hierarchy. And so we have seen these two, which will not have any impact on the processing, or when the attribute hierarchy enabled set to false. And one more thing that will not have an impact is order, attribute hierarchy order. So it indicates whether the members of the attribute hierarchy are ordered or not. If you set it to false, it won't order the attributes. If you set it to true, it will order the attributes. But when the attribute hierarchy enable is false, how can it's gonna matter for us? It won't read the data. And what's the matter in ordering, if you ordering the data if there is no data, right? So this is one attribute which is dependent on enable property. And if you set it to true, it will order the values, and if you set it to false, it's not going to order. For example, here it is set it to true or false. It doesn't make any sense. Let me take any attribute which will have impact. For example, let's see English month name. Okay, the English month name has key column of calendar year and month number. Yesterday we set it, right? And here name display name is English month name. Now the attribute order is set to true. Let me set it to false and process it. So I set the attribute hierarchy order property to false, and let's see how it's going to read the data, whether it's going to read the data in ascending order, or it's going to read the data how it comes in the how it comes from the SQL Server. If you set it to false, it should read the data and it should store the data in the order that is coming from the data warehouse. English month name, we click on here, you can see Jan, Feb, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. I think it's coming in order. So we have to find some other example. So if the attributes hierarchy order set to false, then it is not gonna order the data. Okay, it's not gonna order the members that is available in the hierarchy, attribute hierarchy. And let me show you that again. Here if you see, this information is more than enough to understand. Indicates whether the members are nothing but Jan, Feb, March are the members of the attribute English month name. So whether you want to order it or not. If you set it to false, then order by does not have any impact. Order by is dependent on this property. If you set it to true, then it will check on based on what it has to order. If you set it to false, then no need to check this, right? Because it's not going to order. It's going to take the value that is coming from the database as is. So that is the difference between attribute hierarchy order property setting to true and false. Now Let's see the order by. This is one of the important attribute property. So we already discussed a little bit about the order by when we talk about the English month name. It was ordering in based on the month name, and we set it to order by month number, right, in the last session. Now let's go back to the month name and let's see. For this to work, you need to set this property attribute hierarchy order to true. Then only it will have effect, or else it will not have any impact. Now this guy has 4 different values to pick from. The first one is order by key. That means, which we have already seen, it will be ordered by the columns that are used to form the key column. So these two. That means if I process it, I'm pretty sure that it will be ordered based on the key column, that is year and month number. So it will be Jan, Feb, March, and so on. Let me quickly process and show you the output here. Let me go to the browser, let me reconnect it, and it will be mostly the same, Jan, Feb, March, April. Now the second value for the same that you can pick from is like the name. That means when you select the name, it will order by the column that has been part of the name column. So the name column, it's saying English month name. If it is blank, then what will happen? Then there should be only one key column, right? As per the analysis service syntax. So that key column will be used as the name column, and the same column will be used to order. For example, for now we have the name column set to English month name, and I set the order by property to name. Let's see how it orders the data. So I'm processing it. Good, it's successful. And let me reconnect it, and you can see J is coming first and July is coming first. All the Julys are at one place, and March, and so on. So this is by name. And what is the next value that you can set? Attribute key and attribute name. That means you can use a secondary attribute, the attribute that is not related to this. You can order based on year, based on this attribute, or based on this attribute, or based on this attribute. So that option is available. You can order based on another attribute. For example, let me order based on calendar year or physical year. I can pick whatever I want to. Let me show you an example. English month name, order by, I'm selecting attribute key, and if you select attribute key or attribute name, then you have to select what is the attribute you're gonna use. So here I'm selecting calendar quarter, and if I click on process, so what it will do is, while ordering this attribute, it will take the calendar quarter and its key, and what all the column that is used in the calendar quarter key will be used to order the order this particular attribute. So it's a little tricky, right? If you reconnect it, and you can see May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December, Jan, Feb, March. So all these things, it's based on quarter wise. So it will be always order based on quarter wise. So this is how you can use 4 different properties like attribute key. When you select attribute key or attribute name, or in the order by property, then you have to select what attribute you are gonna pick, or what attribute based on which your current attribute wants to be or you want your current attribute to be ordered. So the next thing is, if you use the attribute hierarchy enable to false, the advantage of people will ask, the interviewer may ask like this: if you disable an attribute, that means if you set the attribute hierarchy enable to false, it won't be processed and it won't be visible to the user. Then what the hell you need, why the hell you need that? Correct? So you can just delete the attribute instead of having the attribute in your structure. So if you have, let's say you have 10 attributes, or let's say these 5 attributes, which you set the property to false, enable property to false. Instead of keeping it, why don't you delete it? So the advantage of having the attribute attribute for which the property of enable is set to false is you can use it in order by attribute. For example, if I select order by key, attribute key, or order by attribute name, in that case I need to select the order by attribute. So here you can select the particular attribute which has relationship, and though it is disabled. Let me go to English month name. Currently it is selecting calendar quarter and it is showing fiscal year 2 because this calendar English month name has relationship to this and this. So that is why it is showing. If you want to order by calendar year, then you need to have the direct relationship to that. Make sure that you have the relationship properly defined in order to show the attribute in the order by attribute. Now it is showing even physical year which is disabled. Can you see? It is disabled. Named by that, but the ordering, okay, and it is showing an error saying that you are using this particular attribute in one of other attributes order by attribute property, and if you go to this, okay, now it should be fine. So this property I set to attribute name by default. The property order by set to attribute name default. That's why it was throwing an error. You can see it throws an error because I need to select this value if I select the name or attribute key or attribute name. So let me keep it for this, and this is the disabled attribute. I'm using this disabled attribute to order my English month name attribute, and if I process it, it will process the data successfully, and it will order the data based on the physical year which is disabled, which is of no use. I mean, users can't use it and data will not be there. MDX queries, it won't work if you use that attribute, but still it can be used for physical year ordering, and you can see the data is in order now. It's May, June, July, August, September, October. This is how it is ordered in the physical year calendar. So the same order it will be displayed. So this is only advantage if you have the attribute property enabled to attribute is disabled. Okay, this is the only advantage. If you're not going to use this attribute which is disabled in the order by of another attribute, then it's as good as deleting the attribute. I hope you understood what I'm trying to say here. So if you are not using the disabled attribute in the order by of any other attribute, then it's as good as deleting the attribute. You can delete it. It's of no use. Users can't see that, data will not be processed, and you're not going to use it in the ordering of the other attributes. Then why you need to have that? Instead of disabling and keeping the structure pretty complex, you can simply delete those attributes which you are not enabling. Okay, or for those, the property of the attribute hierarchy enable is set to false. Instead of setting it to false, you better delete it. Okay, now let's see one more important property. This is at dimension level. The property is unknown member. If you see here unknown member, there is none, hidden, visible, or automatic null. So there are 4 different values which you can set. Basically, what is this unknown member? Let's say there are some key columns which are available in your fact table, and which for those the keys are missing in your dimension table. For example, you know the for referential integrity, right? So this is your dimension table and this is your fact table. If you have ID 1, here ID 1 can be used. If you have ID 2 here and you don't have 2 here, that means the referential integrity is missing, right? The 2 which is used in the fact table, you don't know what is the parent of it because it does not have record. So while processing, it will throw error saying that the key is not available in the dimension table during processing. So normally it throws error message, but you can change the configuration. Don't concentrate much about this error configuration, but just remember if there is any key not found, by default it will be report and stop it. What it will do is it will report the error and it will stop it. Here you can set it to ignore error or report and continue, which will continue to process. It will ignore the error. Okay, when the property of key not found set to this, then the unknown member property plays a major role. So the unknown member property, if it is visible, then all the keys in the fact table for which there is no primary key in the primary key table, or there is no record in the primary key table, then all those things will fall into unknown bucket. There will be an unknown record created at the end and it will show all the records. Let's assume I have a 10 fact records, and I have two dimension records. Dimension ID 1, key is 1 and key is 2. For this one, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and this is 3, 4, 5, 6. And I don't have these four key values in my master table. In other words, in my dimension table. So what will happen? Yeah, it will fail. And if I set the error configuration property to ignore the error and proceed further, what it will do is the one text will be joined with all the one IDs here in the transaction table, and the two keys will be joined with the two, and all the missing keys in the dimension will create a new record called unknown, and all the sales like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 will be added and it will be shown as unknown. That means basically I don't know what is the master record for these sales because there is no mapping or matching key in the dimension table. So this unknown will come into picture when you have error configuration property of the key not found set to report and continue or ignore error. Then all those things will fall into the unknown bucket. And now if you go and see the unknown property, once you set it to visible, automatic null means it will be converted to null and ignore, or and hidden means it won't be shown, and none means nothing will be, no action will be taken if they find any error, so it will just discard it. Only when it is visible you can give the name of the unknown. So this is the date time, right? Instead of showing, if you leave it as blank, it will show as unknown sales is $10,000. Instead of that, you can give no dates found. So what it will do is it will add a record. Instead of unknown, it will display saying that no records found, this is the total sales. In the same way, if you go to the products table, unknown products, that means it will say, okay, these are the sales that are of the products which are unknown, or of the products which does not have a record in the dimension. So this is one important property if you have issues with your data, particularly referential integrity failures or referential integrity related issues with your data. And if you set the error configuration property to report, ignore error for the key not found, then in that case the unknown property will be very helpful. Normally you don't change the processing option, you will try to correct the data most of the cases. It will, when it fails saying that the key not found in the dimension table which is available in the fact table, then it will say that error and it will stop the processing. And what people will do is they'll go to the database and they'll correct, okay, these keys are missing. Either they'll insert the keys or they will delete the fact data for which there is no primary key call on, and there is no data in the dimension table, and then they'll reprocess it, or else they'll set the property to report and continue or ignore error, and they'll put all the data, all such data, into the unknown member bucket. So that is about unknown member and unknown member name. And if you remember, when we try to create parent-child hierarchy using employee name, and if you see here, this employee hierarchy is showing as unknown. Can you see? Under Ken so on, so there is unknown property. The reason is, for this particular dimension, if you go to the properties, the unknown member is set to visible and there is nothing given here. Let me show it as unknown parent, something like this. Okay, and if I process it, instead of showing some acquired member saying that unknown, it will show some meaningful name like unknown parent or unknown employee. It's your wish. You can see it's changed to unknown parent. So all the missing key related data, fact data, will be shown under this unknown parent bucket. And it was showing unknown, and this employee new was not showing unknown because the property is set to, let me go to the property, set to none. That means it will not be, specifies the existence of an unknown member and whether that member is visible or hidden. Fact data, blah blah blah. It's set to none. That means it's not showing, it won't show, it won't do anything with this data, with this kind of data. So this question was asked in the last session, like why it is showing unknown when it is created, when the parent-child hierarchy is created automatically, and when it is created manually. That's just because this particular attribute. This particular attribute is, normally it will be none, So normally it will be, I think, hidden or none. And for the primary, I mean, parent-child hierarchy tables or self-reference tables, it is setting to visible. That is the difference. That is why it was showing unknown when we created, um, when the SSAS server created the parent-child hierarchy, and it is not showing when we created the parent-child hierarchy manually. And if you see the dimension related properties, we have error configurations, okay, which is very important. Normally, you will get lot of errors while processing based on these key columns. If the key is missing in the dimension table, or if it is null, it will throw, or if it is having duplicates, it will throw. For example, if you see key duplicate, what it is set is like report and stop. And if you know that this particular dimension, you will be getting duplicate records, and you just ignore it, and it is fine to ignore, then you can set it to ignore error or report and continue. If it is report and continue, it will report and it will continue. If it is ignore error, it will just continue. If there is any calculation related error, then it will continue. Ignore error, or the same thing you can set any calculation that is defined on this one. If there is in this dimension table, then if there is any error, by default it is set to ignore error. And by default, key duplicates is set to report and stop, because key duplicates has to be addressed. And few cases, very rare cases, people are fine to go ahead with the processing if there is a duplicate key found. And key error action, what we have to do if there is any key error here, like for example, key not found. If you set it to ignore error, then what action it has to take? Convert to unknown. Then it will go to an unknown property, and it will check what is the value that is set for the unknown property, whether it's visible or whether it's hidden. Based on that, it will take the action. So here you are saying convert to unknown or discard record. Discard record means just ignore the record. If there is no key found, key column found, and there are a lot of fact records for that, if you set it to discard record, it will discard the record and it will continue. Or if you set it to convert, it will go to convert, and it will store, it will show display all the fact data in the unknown bucket. And key error limit 0 is I think it's infinite. Or if you set it to 3 errors, until continue until 3 errors, after that it fails. So something like that. And if it is 0 now, so even a single error, then it will fail. I think if you set it to -1, then it will be infinite. I'm not sure, but I know, and I never tried. I hope it is -1. So 0 means even a single error occurred, throw that and fail the processing. And key error limit action, what it has to do if it reaches the limit that is set here, stop processing, or you can say stop logging. If it is logging the error, just stop logging and continue, or do whatever it is defined at each and every error action. So by default it is stop processing. So if it reaches at least one error, let's say I set it to 6, it will be fine. It will continue to process until it encounters 6 errors. But once the 6th error is reached, then it will say stop processing. Then it will stop the processing of the dimension, and it will say you have to fix these errors before continuing the process. And key log file, if it is to log, stop logging and log file, if you set it some file here, then it will be logging all the errors into the file. You can try setting a file path and try to inject some errors into the dimension processing and see how it logs to the file. And key not found, if the key is not found, this is what we discussed a couple of minutes. Now we set to ignore error, but the default one is report and stop. So these 3 values is common for everything. Either you want the server to ignore, or report and continue, or report and stop. For most of the things which is set to report and stop, it's always good to continue with that, because it will let you know what are all the key related or the dimension related errors that are available in the data that are injected into your data. And null key converted to unknown, if there is any null key found, key column, the value is null, what you want to do, you want to ignore the error, or report and continue, or report and stop. Set it to report and stop if you want to stop it. And null key not allowed, if there is any null key, it will stop, or you can set it to ignore error if you want to ignore it. And if you set it to ignore error, then it will come here, null key converted to unknown. If it converts, what it has to do, ignore error or report and continue and report. See, if you see these two, If the null key is converted to unknown, then what it has to do? It has to continue or it has to stop. And here null key not allowed. If null key is found, what it has to do? If it is report and stop, it will stop. That's it. This is the first step. If you set it to ignore error and if it is converted to unknown, then what you have to do? You want to continue with that or after converting, or you just report and stop. So these error configuration, if you see by default, whatever the Microsoft is set is the best error configuration. If you want to change, make sure that the users are fine with the property change, like even there is duplicates, whether they are fine to go ahead with the processing and they're fine to query the data. And if there is any null keys, are they fine to go ahead and the process? Or if there is any key missing, are they fine to go ahead with the process? Check with them before making the change, because the default error configuration is really the best one. And not only for this error configuration, what are the properties that are set by Microsoft as default values? Those are really good to for the performance as on both the processing as well as querying. If you want to change any of the default value, think about it, analyze the impact, and then go ahead with the change if you're fine with the impact of the change. Okay, that's it for today's session, and we'll discuss a lot of properties and creating the daytime dimensions on the server and on the underlying database in the next session.